Podemos dar inicio. Muchas gracias. Bueno, equipo, la última sesión recientita fue el aprendizaje que tuvieron viviendo a través del simulador, y en esta oportunidad nos vuelve a acompañar Denis para conocer nuevos conceptos y seguir alimentando, digamos, como un toolkit más amplio de cómo liderar y cómo gestionar los cambios, sobre todo en un contexto como en el que estamos. Así que, Denis, muchas gracias y bienvenido.
Thanks. As Britt said, we've been able to look at systems change. Let me just remind people, you all know the translation button at the bottom if you want to listen along in Spanish, or if you want to practice your English. We've had a chance to think about systems change with Dario, and looking at the implications of making a change and how it rolls out through the system. Now we're going to come right back to you as a leader, and we're going to talk about how do I lead the most difficult change. And I'm going to make some distinctions between technical kinds of challenges and adaptive kinds of challenges, and why the adaptive ones are the more difficult ones to lead through, to help people through. And so and we can also use the chat, or you can come off of mute, but does anybody remember what, you can think back to your biology days, but can anybody remember what, let's make sure I've got my right stuff up here. Charles Darwin is famous for. I was trying not to do the reveal too soon here.
The evolution of the human being.
Yep, absolutely evolution. Does anybody remember the quote that most people attribute to Darwin? What was he famous for being quoted? Yep. What do we know him for?
I think that it was something like those who not evolve perish, or something alike.
Very good, very good. A lot of people get that. Yeah, go ahead, Lucho.
Era como que el que mejor se adapta sobrevive, algo así.
Very nice, very nice. A lot of people, that's perfect, and I see it coming up in the chat, thanks. A lot of people think Darwin said only the fittest survive, and that's actually not true. And each of you are exactly right. What he actually said is, it's not the strongest that survives, it's nor is it the most intelligent, it's the one that is the most adaptive to change. Yep. And so, exactly right. And so when we talk about the most difficult change, you are going to be, we're going to be talking about this framing from evolutionary biology that says it is those that are most adaptive are the ones that survive and thrive. And so this is some theory and some practice from two people at Harvard, Linsky and Heifetz, called adaptive leadership or adaptive change. And so I'm going to talk you through some of these principles of what the elements of adaptive change is, why that's harder than technical change, but it all has its roots in evolutionary biology. And so whether we talk about a system of an organism, an animal or a human, or an organizational system, they all share a certain set of features. They all like to maintain equilibrium. They do not like to be disrupted. Antibodies come out and try to kill off changes to the system when the adaptive nature of challenges are being faced. So we're going to talk about those. And the idea is that adaptive leadership is about identifying what's precious versus what's expendable. Many of us, when we're in really big change, it feels like everything is changing. But the fact is, the research says it is rare that more than 30% of a system ever changes. The most that ever changes in a system is 25 to 30%. It feels like more, it feels like everything is affected, but the fact is it's actually a small percentage of what is expendable or what it is you try to change. And the majority, 70 to 75% of the system doesn't change. People feel like it's a bigger amount, people feel personally disrupted, but it's usually a fairly small percentage of our practices, of our operating principles, of our policies that change even in the most dramatic transformations. And so the practice of adaptive leadership is identifying what's precious versus expendable, taking experimentation into play and taking some smart risks, and then the discipline of integrating the outcome of those experimentations back into the system, into some next practices. We all do it all the time. I'm just going to slow down the process that we talk about here. And it's going to be coming in three pieces. Part one is how we are all dealing with so many things every day. It's hard for us to get a little distance. It's hard for us to get on the balcony and see the patterns of what's happening around us in the system. So how do we get on the balcony and identify adaptive change? Because it's the more difficult one. Part two is going to be, how do you navigate that corporate immune system when it comes out to try and stop the changes you're trying to put in place? How does that show up? And how do we lead and manage through that? And then finally, we'll talk in part three of today of how do we give the work back and battle work avoidance. So there's two big ideas here. One is the definition of adaptive change is the ability to disappoint people at a rate that they can absorb. So it's kind of funny, but well, it's not kind of funny, but it is an interesting definition. It says adaptive change is the ability to disappoint people at a rate that they can absorb. And the idea is this: there are people in your teams who would step in front of a bus for you. They would do anything for you, and they have to get to someplace new, and they're not going to like it. They're going to be personally disrupted. It's going to be very hard for them. So how do we help them get to a new place that they're not going to like without them disengaging or checking out, right? Or being overwhelmed. And I think that's the essence of when we start talking about the really hard change is how do we disappoint people at a rate that keeps them moving, but makes them uncomfortable, and that they can keep moving forward as we start trying some new practices and new ways of working. So that's kind of my setup on the storyline of where we're going to go. Part one for us is get on the balcony. Now, most of us live on the dance floor. That's where the action is. That's where all of the things are happening right around us. But if we can't make time to get on the balcony, we'll never be able to see the patterns on the dance floor. And so part of our work in adaptive leadership and adaptive change is that we have to observe the patterns and the people. We have to generate some hypotheses about what is technical change. That is change we know how to do. It's hard work, but we know it. We have the capability to do it within our own skill set. And what is adaptive change? That is change that requires learning. We're going to have to learn some new things. We're going to have to try some new things. It is not a skill we have today. The difficulty for us as leaders at our level is we always like to define things in the form of technical challenges. We always think we can figure it out. We always think we know the answer, or we can apply our experience to these new situations, when sometimes we can, but sometimes we can't. The other part about getting on the balcony and naming the adaptive challenge is when it's really difficult change, people do not always say what they mean and what they're thinking. And so one of the big elements for this first chapter of our story is, how will we ever understand what's not being said? What is it that people aren't saying about this that we need to make sure we're keyed into? All right, so this is the first idea for us on the really difficult changes. How do we get on the balcony? And part two of this chapter is identifying an adaptive challenges versus a technical one. As I said, If it's a technical one, the problem definition is clear, the solution is known, and it is solved through authority or expertise. We have a new version of Microsoft Word or Microsoft Office. We understand what it's for. We understand how to use the previous versions. It is an expert-led solution. I have to learn a few new features against a set of experience I already have. And I'll contrast that with an adaptive challenge. Most of the change that we faced in this last year is much more adaptive. That is, the problem definition, even understanding the problem, requires us to think about it differently. The problem definition may not be clear because sometimes we start to solve a problem and we find out it's actually a bit of a different problem. So it requires us to learn. The solution for an adaptive problem will be arrived at through experimentation and taking some smart risks, because we're having to learn some new things, and it will never be solved through expertise. If it's truly an adaptive problem, it's going to be an act of will. It's going to be solved through leadership and managing a variety of stakeholders, because adaptive problems tend to cut across silos. So whenever we think about a difficult challenge that we're in today, something that's really hard for us, the first thing we want to do is make sure we're making time to get on the balcony. How will we get enough perspective and distance to see the patterns of what's going to happen? Will I make time to think about this problem and not just jump into the firefighting? Number two, is this a technical problem or is it an adaptive problem? A little bit more on that. So technical problems are work that we know and we can do. We can primarily deliver those with our current set of expertise and experience. We can quantify success. So we understand how we use Phoenix today, and we understand what chapter 2 of Phoenix is going to look like. It can be hard work, it's complicated work, but it doesn't disorient us. We actually know there's a plan and in a literal project plan. People may not be central to the solution of a technical problem. That might be software, that might be policy. It may not be people who solve that problem. It could be solved in a lot of ways. And again, ownership is always clear because the actual way to solve technical problems will be done through expertise and authority. Now, on the adaptive side, it's work we don't know how to do. It tends to be messy, not linear, so that as we learn some things, we then adapt and adjust. We think we know it, we learn some things, we have to readjust our approach and how we go about things. And whenever the problem is adaptive, one of the ways we know is because people have significant emotional stakes. So in my experience, people don't resist change, people resist loss. And when we start dealing with the most difficult challenges of change, there are always heightened emotions, and people have a significant felt sense of loss. And so if we don't understand that felt sense of loss, if we can't describe what we think or how people feel like they're losing something, then we probably don't quite have it. We probably do not understand it clearly enough. What we find also in adaptive challenges is that people with the problem are often part of the problem. And we find that, as I mentioned before, to solve it, it usually requires you to look across stakeholders. You probably aren't going to solve it just within your own line. You're going to have to work with others across boundary, cross borders, cross functions. All right, so those are the big features. So here's what I'd like you to do is I want to get you into some small groups, and I want you to discuss some of the change challenge that you brought with you. What is a big change challenge that you're facing now or you're about to embark on? And when you look at that change challenge, do I know enough about starting on that challenge to say, what is it that people won't say? What is it that people will have a felt sense of loss about in my challenge? And is it more adaptive or is it more technical? Can it be solved through expertise and authority, or does it have to be solved through a range of stakeholders and us doing some experimentation as we go through it? But let's start with those first two questions. Is do I understand this issue and challenge deeply enough that I can take some guesses, make some hypotheses about what's not being said about this change? And then number two, is my challenge more adaptive or more technical? And we're going to take, Flor, let's take 30 minutes. In the meeting, in the sessions, make sure you go around and hear everybody's change challenge and make sure that we talk about whether it is an adaptive issue that requires us to learn and experiment, or if it's a technical issue that we can solve with expertise.
Thank you, Dennis. And just a
Thank you.
reminder that the instructions are in the chat so that when you are in your room, you can go ahead and see the instructions.
Welcome back. Welcome back. So I'd like to hear a couple of examples. Danny said he popped into a few of the rooms. He was able to hear some of the stories that were pretty interesting, but who'd like to start? Just what were some of the interesting features that you talked about in your conversations? Who would like to start us off? What were either some of the ideas about getting on the balcony around things that we know or we think may not be being said, or what were some of the adaptive features of some of the challenges you faced?
Ahí algo que coincidieron todos los grupos o todas las personas en el grupo es del entorno particularmente cambiante y retador que se vive cross geografías. Entonces, en la medida que íbamos compartiendo los ejemplos, otras personas iban aumentando y dicen, sí, efectivamente, yo también vivo eso en mi reto y yo también vivo eso en el reto, y eso nos plantea a todos la especial atención a liderar el cambio y empezar a adaptarnos en un entorno que cada vez te pide más y con menos recursos. Y en ese caso, si hay mucha información disponible, cada vez va a haber menos información disponible porque muchas veces la información cuesta dinero y ya va a ser un recurso limitado, y surge la necesidad de ir entendiendo y conociendo esta información que no es tan explícita para ir tomando decisiones e ir generando cambio.
Yeah, and whatever that story or that information that you have is can change immediately, right? It can change by the next week. It could even be, it is that fast paced. Thanks, Lucho. Mónica.
Nosotros comenzamos a hablar un poco de los cambios que nos estaba tocando vivir, pero nos dimos cuenta que como organización hoy estamos viviendo un cambio súper fuerte. La organización, por la coyuntura país que está pasando Perú, económica, social, en realidad la organización está viviendo un cambio súper fuerte, que es un cambio que nos está llevando a tener decisiones mucho más choiceful, a priorizar, y como organización no somos una empresa que estemos muy acostumbrados a priorizar, no sabemos. Entonces, este es un cambio súper fuerte y que se viene ya, y si bien tiene cosas, es una decisión ya tomada, y si bien todo el mundo está con la mentalidad de cambio, uno, nos va a costar, y dos, también hay un montón de cosas ocultas que no necesariamente se dicen, pero la gente tiene miedo no solamente por la coyuntura país, tiene miedo también por qué va a pasar con mi puesto de trabajo. Hay mucho tema de egos, porque si se prioriza, ¿qué significa? ¿Que no era importante? Entonces, nosotros como líderes, primero que tenemos un reto súper grande porque nosotros mismos tenemos esos miedos, tenemos esos egos, entonces tenemos que acelerar el cambio de chip y hacerlo más rápido, porque luego nos va a tocar acompañar a los equipos a este cambio, para que de alguna manera nos adaptemos, porque es algo que la organización pide ya, y va a ser un rol súper importante el que tengamos que tener para mantener motivados a los equipos y sobre todo energizados. Me encantó la frase que utilizaste al inicio de este cambio adaptativo es la capacidad de despertar, de decepcionar o incomodar a las personas, pero mantenerlas movilizadas, porque de verdad siento que es lo que hoy es el reto que estamos enfrentando. Vamos a incomodarnos todos, pero necesitamos de alguna manera mantenernos movilizados porque es la única manera en la cual vamos a poder afrontar lo que nos toca como país. Hemos vivido muchos años de bonanza y se nos vienen épocas complicadas, épocas de crisis, pero pues hay que adaptarnos para sobrevivir.
Thanks, Monica. Yes, Alicorp does not like to say no. We do not like to take things off our plate. And so I think that is so hard. And this is a conversation Britt knows I've been having with your senior team for, I don't know, 2 years. That is, we know we need to prioritize. We believe we have to prioritize, but boy, we do not like to say no. We like to say yes. We like to say more. And so it is hard work, and it is personally disappointing for people because people do like to accomplish, and you don't want to see your projects not progress. So it is a hard friction for us, especially in this culture. Maricruz.
Hi, Danny. Nice to see you again. Voy a hablar en español para seguir con todo el mood del equipo. Yo creo que también este contexto de muchas pelotas en el aire genera también mucha ambigüedad. Y eso contribuye a este estrés personal que también decía Moni. Pero creo que algo que cada vez estoy viendo, y tal vez era por este cambio de rol también que he pasado un poco a un rol más corporativo, que al tener muchas cosas en el aire, antes daba tiempo que las cosas se repitan. Había licencia que 2 o 3 equipos estén haciendo lo mismo, porque estaba todo bien y cada quien hacía lo suyo. Pero ahora, que está forzando y viendo el lado positivo y la oportunidad detrás del caos, está forzando a que sí o sí salgamos de nuestros hilos, a que sí o sí empecemos a encontrar sinergias, y a que estos silos se destruyan para empezar a trabajar por una fuerza común. Aquí en Perú hablamos de fuente ovejuna, todos a una, y donde empecemos a trabajar con ese mindset. Entonces ya no es M&A trabajando una cosa, estrategia trabajando otra, para ponerlo en un ejemplo concreto, sino es juntos sacando algo adelante. Entonces ya no estamos repitiendo esfuerzo, estamos sumando, y en menos tiempo estamos siendo tal vez capaces de hacer más. Yo creo que eso es algo lindo si lo vemos de cara a la oportunidad. Y por otro lado, estoy viendo el lado positivo, y por otro lado creo que siguiendo más sobre estos features que pueden estar sucediendo, es que también no nos olvidemos que esto está en un entorno pandémico, donde donde es más retador energizar. Porque cuando tienes este tipo de cosas, tú puedes ir y te sientas con el equipo, y Alfredo tal vez puede bajar y de pronto puede decir, puedes empezar a crear rituales físicos, el tocarte, el verte, te hace tener un feeling distinto. Pero ¿cómo energizas a través de Zoom? A través de Teams, ¿no? Es mucho más retador. ¿Y cómo te aseguras que también no solamente a ti te energicen, sino como líderes tenemos la responsabilidad de ser este embudo con nuestro equipo? Entonces, ¿cómo podemos crear rituales que nos ayuden a seguir energizando? Yo escuchaba mucho la historia de Paula también, que nos contaba de Argentina y el contexto más complejo que tienen. Claro, y cómo lo logras en un mundo de pandemia, creo que esa es otra característica de macroambiente que también influye mucho y que se le suma a este tema. Entonces, tenemos, creo que todos los que estamos aquí, un reto de país, un reto político, un reto sociocultural, un reto compañía, y por todos lados donde lo veas es retador, ¿no? Pero es más complejo en este entorno porque energizar a veces te salva, y aquí es más complejo en este contexto, ¿no?
Thanks, Maricruz. And you may have heard me say this before. The research is pretty clear that the amount of energy that a leader brings to their team is 3 times more predictive of that team's success than the next thing. Rob Cross at Babson Business School was pretty clear. The amount of energy that a leader brings is 3 times more predictive of that team's success than the next thing. Doesn't matter how long the team's known each other, doesn't matter how expert they are. It turns out our ability to energize our teams is hugely predictive of their success. It's incredible. And I think it's easy to forget because we're so busy with in here. But you made some other points, but I did want to make sure I double clicked on that one, Maricruz. Thank you. Ernesto and then Patrick, please.
Hola, hola a todos. Bueno, dentro del equipo, igual, mismos comentarios. El tema de priorización es una de las oportunidades que tenemos. Y como lo dijo Denis, o sea, de repente, cuando hay una asignación adicional, simplemente la tomamos porque queremos cumplir, pero tampoco nos cuestionamos qué podemos dejar de hacer. O sea, hay cosas que cuando estamos en una situación particular, con una coyuntura distinta, podemos cuestionar lo que venimos haciendo y ahí ganar algo de espacio para poder gestionar recursos y movernos hacia adelante. En un entorno donde hay muchos proyectos en simultáneo rodando, el equipo también está muy desgastado y siente que está en una carrera que nunca termina. Tenemos que lidiar con equipo desgastado y adicionalmente que debe ser motivado y que no solo su estrés es laboral, sino también personal. Durante esta pandemia han perdido familia, hay personas que han perdido sus trabajos, sus realidades personales han cambiado, en algunos casos más dramáticamente que otras, pero todo eso y encima tener que enfrentar, en mi caso, y conversamos en el caso de VitaPro, un proceso de eficiencia que tenemos que llevarlo a cabo, adicionalmente a cambiar el sistema, adicionalmente a sacar un nuevo producto, etcétera, etcétera. Tenemos esa complejidad adicional. Entonces, es un cóctel bien complejo de manejar. Entonces, eso era un poco lo que veíamos. ¿Cómo podemos motivar al equipo? ¿Qué le podemos dar al equipo? O sea, lo intangible es, oye, estás ganando horas de vuelo, estás generando conocimiento, estás creciendo como profesional, pero dentro de todo este entorno llega un momento en que el equipo puede quebrar.
Yeah. Ernesto, thanks. Thank you for that. I think we often remember about recognition. We want to recognize people who do good work, and that helps. But we can sometimes forget that communication during difficult times is often not about information. It's about connection. And so just the effect of reaching out, connecting, sometimes that in itself is motivating for people because there's a bit of that, I'm here and I care, that matters a lot to people. So I love the idea of putting some finishes to things and saying we've completed this and that piece is done. And there will be more to come, right? We will keep making the best decision until we have better information to make another one. But I love the way you framed it in the beginning. Patrick, and then I want to get us to the chapter 2, please.
Y muy brevemente, yo me quedé con una idea que mencionó Maricruz sobre esto de tener muchas pelotitas en el aire, ¿no? Me hizo pensar qué fácil es en los tiempos de calma llegar a una zona de confort que nos permite pues tener estas ineficiencias, estas duplicidades, ¿no? Aislarnos, dejarnos llevar más por el ego y perder de vista el objetivo colectivo, ¿no? Y ahí mi pregunta es cómo, mi pregunta para Denis, es cómo en estos procesos de cambio retomamos ese objetivo colectivo o tenemos esta mirada más de equipo y no hacer cambios pequeños, aislados, creyendo que eso nos va a llevar a un cambio integral.
That's great. I'm gonna pick that up in a little bit, Patrick. I think that one of the truths of prioritization is that it ends up lifting it ends up lifting interdependency. So as we prioritize, we actually have to collaborate more and connect more across. It's the nature of systems. So when I like this idea that when we say, hey, those were the good old days, and you might have some duplication of effort, and we could pursue things on our own. But as soon as we narrow the pipe, we're going to be required to connect across in some more and different ways. So I think there's one piece of that, Patrick, that is how good are we at looking across, connecting across, not just us, right, but our teams, because we can't do all that work. But how do they see far enough or broad enough outside of their own house so that they make those connections themselves? But this is the fundamental nature of teams today, not being just intact and isolated, but also lateral. And so we'll talk a little more about that. Maricruz, did you have one more comment? And then I'm going to move us to the next chapter, please.
Sí, yo solo quería compartir un miedo, que es que yo escucho y tenemos y hablamos en el día a día entre muchos líderes, y finalmente contra todo esto el balance es positivo, ¿no? El balance es que tenemos energía, el balance es que miramos hacia adelante, el balance es que tenemos dosis de optimismo y de realidad. A mí de verdad me da un poco de miedo y tal vez cómo ayudamos a la organización a no llegar a ese punto que estamos en una vorágine de cosas que nos lleva a ser como máquinas. O sea, ya naturalmente la cultura latinoamericana nos lleva a ver el trabajo como una forma de, y somos más máquinas, ¿no? Otras culturas son mucho más respetuosas de este balance de su vida y del trabajo es un tool más y es un habilitador más. Nosotros no. Si a eso le sumamos este contexto, mi gran temor es cómo que podemos correr un riesgo que con estas miles de pelotas en el aire, olvidarnos de que somos seres humanos necesariamente y que ese positivismo que ahorita tenemos y esa alegría se vaya convirtiendo en tristeza, ¿no? O se vaya convirtiendo, porque justamente ya te empiezas a cansar. Creo que cómo gestionamos eso para nosotros mismos y para el equipo es un miedo, ¿no? Siempre hablábamos que cuando estamos en compañías, pasamos etapas duras. Mientras sepamos que son coyunturales y no estructurales, nos mantiene viva la esperanza de que va a pasar porque sabemos que así va a ser. Pero aquí no sabemos cuándo va a tener fin. Y esa es la gran diferencia versus otras veces. Entonces, ¿cómo hacemos para no caer en eso? Porque podemos caer muy fácilmente, creo yo. Es muy riesgoso. Estamos en una línea muy, muy tibia. ¿Y cómo hacemos nosotros como líderes para llevar a la organización a que no pase, ¿no? ¿Qué tendríamos que hacer nosotros para que eso no pase?
Yeah, these are pretty deep topics for a Thursday afternoon, but okay, let's, all right, I love it. Two things I'll say as we're thinking, Maricruz. One is, you'll always hear me say, you have to take care of your side of the street before you can take care of others, you know? So just like, to me, energy, resilience is, if you don't manage your own, you can't bring it to the others, and you can't energize your team if you can't manage your own. So I think first job is you have to take care of yourself, and if you run yourself into the ground constantly, you can't do it. You can't bring it to the team. You can't be good for them. Second, there's this interesting idea you bring up, though, of attachment. So a very good friend of mine, a longtime friend of mine, she is the chief operating officer and chief administrative officer at Harley-Davidson. And her motto in difficult change years is high achievement, low attachment, which is, we're going to do our best with as much as we know, but we're not going to get so attached to everything that we live or die by just one project's outcome, right? But so her motto is high achievement, low attachment. We're going to work hard. We're going to do our very best with the information we have, But we can't get attached to everything. We can't love everything equally because things will continue to change. So I know that's not very, I know that's not always helpful advice, but I think it is good for us to practice a little bit of that low attachment as we have to worry and work through these adjustments. Let me get us into chapter 2. Britt didn't give me the evil eye yet, but she could if I get too far behind. Chapter 2 for us is, how do we navigate the corporate immune system? How do we name the conflict and regulate the distress? And so here, under chapter 2, I want to set you up for another quick conversation. It says, number 1, don't underestimate the desire of a system to maintain the status quo. Systems work hard to maintain balance, right? And our job as leaders is to keep disrupting that balance and introducing change. We run the business, we deliver the business, but at the same time, the more senior we get, the more our job is also to keep advancing the business and keep improving the business. So every organization has an immune system, and an immune system will surface in 3 different ways. Sometimes it surfaces through precedent, right? History and tradition. We've always done it that way. We can't do it this way. Sometimes the immune system surfaces in people. I'm the boss. I have ways that I work. I'm not on with these new ways yet. And sometimes the immune system surfaces it's in processes. Look, we've got to these policies and we got to these processes through years of experimentation and practice, and so that's why we should follow them. But I'm going to give you my my equation. Let me see if I have that set up right here. I'm going to give you my mathematical equation for difficult change. It's not mathematical, it's just for fun. And it is this. Whenever we think about adaptive change, the really hard change, this is the equation that should come to mind. And that is preserving the past plus protecting the present does not equal finding the future. So when we think about the most difficult change, the system is all about preserving the past and perfecting the present. It's rarely about finding the future. And so I think as we start trying new things, as we start experimenting with different ways of working and different projects or prioritization, we have to first understand that organizations are built on preserving the past and perfecting the present, and they will never take you to the future if we as leaders don't bring it there. So the interesting thing, one of the ways that we navigate the immune system is through experimentation, because most people can get on board with experimentation. Well, let's try this and see what happens. What's the experiment that we can try? You don't have to buy the whole thing, but what's the first next step? How do we actually try something and then see what happens? Most people will move towards change through a mindset of experimentation. So it's one of the big tools we have for adaptive change. Does anybody know how many experiments Google runs in a year? Anybody want to guess? Take a wild guess.
50.
What did I hear? What was the number? 60.
50.
Thank you.
100.
1,000.
1,000.
2000.
2,000. You guys, you're being very safe, but 20,000. Google runs over 20,000 experiments a year. And so it is, now one point is, of course, they can cheat. Whoops, that was me. They can cheat because they can segment off a small set of consumers on the platform, and then they can try some things and they can see how it goes. So as a tech company, it's easier for them to run experiments. But the point is, their culture is built around experimentation. It's about evolving and changing. And so it is just an adaptive culture. So running 20,000 experiments a year, you could imagine they'll be thinking, is that enough? right? How many should we be actually running? So experimentation is the way that we navigate around the immune system when it comes out to stop our change. You can do many things with experimentation. One of the things we can do is look for data that doesn't just prove our point. We can also run multiple experiments, even in different ways, so we can try different perspectives and points of view. But experimentation is the big lesson in navigating the immune system. So here's where we are at the moment. The adaptive leadership process is starting with observation. Can we get on the balcony and can we see what are the patterns that are evolving? What is it that people are doing? What is it they're not doing? Are they embracing the change? Are they avoiding the change? But what are those patterns that we're seeing? And then second, we provide some interpretation. What is it that people are not saying? What are my hypotheses about the kind of loss that they may be experiencing? The things that might not be said, but I can start to get a sense of. And then finally, we move to intervention by experimentation. What are the one or two things we can try? So if I understand the issues and I understand that felt sense of loss, what are the one or two things I can try and experiment with to get this in place? And this is the fast path through adaptive change as we move along in this chapter. So second part of chapter 2 is, can we name the conflict and regulate the distress? So if we have some hypotheses about that felt sense of loss, can we name the tension? And then our job as leaders is to regulate the distress. And so I'm not sure what the Spanish word is, but we have to think about our job as managing a thermostat, right? Like the heat in a house. Our job is to turn up the heat, but we watch until people start checking out or they start doing things that are not in line with the priorities that we need. And then we turn the heat back. What we don't do is flip the thermostat up on high and then walk away and just turn all the heat on for the change. So part of our job is to regulate the pressure, regulate the heat. And one of the ways we do that is we sequence and pace the work. As several of you said in chapter 1, so many things are important. We often can start many new initiatives without stopping others. We don't always say the 2 most important things, the 3 most important things. And so therefore, we can overwhelm and disorient the people who have to take responsibility for the work. When we overwhelm and disorient them, what do? They tend to look up. They tend to look to us for answers when it's actually their responsibility to do the work. So our job is to regulate the pressure. We do that through sequencing the work and pacing the work for the team, but we also have to have the emotional capacity to tolerate the uncertainty and frustration, because people are going to get frustrated. People are going to try some things, and if they're not successful, they either may stop trying or they'll go back to the old way. And our job is to hold the tension. So we can empathize, right? We don't do it with anger or frustration. We do it with empathy. We say this is difficult and we have to keep at it. And we have to hold the tension. So here in chapter 2, I'd like to get you into a 20-minute breakout. We're going to get you back in your teams. And I want you to talk a little bit about when you've had to manage this difficult change you're in, or one that you're about to start. When you look at it, where is the corporate immune system going to come out and try to kill off your changes? Is it in the history? Is it in what is it going to be? Where will the corporate immune system come out? And can you foresee where people are going to get frustrated or where their uncertainty is going to surface? Do you have some hypotheses about where that frustration or tension is going to surface? Let's start with those 2 questions. Where's the corporate immune system going to come out to block? And where is it, in your view, that people are going to surface the frustration? Can we actually put a name on it, that sense of loss? Let's give it a try, and then let's come back and talk about it. All right. So we went off to talk a little bit about where's the corporate immune system going to come out, and when frustration and uncertainty surface, particularly in our teams, where is that likely to happen? Can we predict it? Do we know what's going on? But what are some of the things you talked about? Who'd like to jump in? What were some of the things that were interesting in that last round in some of the chat?
Nosotros en el equipo hablamos mucho de lo que hacíamos nosotros para estar bien. Creo que fue la respuesta la primera que empezamos a abordar, nos dimos un poquito más de tiempo, porque todo esto genera mucha tensión, la pandemia, el cambio, la compañía en nuestra propia vida. Entonces, ¿cómo hacemos para canalizar esa energía? Y creo que salieron dos cosas importantes, ¿no? Que las pongo un poco sobre la mesa. La primera es darnos este espacio personal para hacer las cosas que nos hacen sentir bien, desde comer hasta hacer deporte y demás. Pero también salió cómo llevamos a nuestros equipos hacia eso. Y una buena práctica que teníamos muchos los de mi equipo, todos, era prácticamente tener conversaciones con nuestros equipos, pero no conversaciones vinculadas al trabajo, sino conversaciones vinculadas al trabajo y la vida, ¿no? A conversar. A diferencia que antes conversabas en un pasillo, ahora tienes que poner una agenda para conversar, ¿no? Y que era algo importante y sobre todo más importante ahora para que no solo todo sea tan monótono y no todo sea una reacción al cambio, sino también saber las emociones detrás del cambio, sobre todo en nuestros equipos.
One of the, thanks, Maricruz. One of the things I will do with teams often is before they get together, a little piece of homework that we create a user's manual. And so it's a little thing that says, what's it like to work with Dennis? Like, is he a morning person or is he not? Does he like to come prepared for meetings or does he like, but sometimes these little things where you spend the first 10 minutes saying, let's review people's user's manual. What's it like to work with Maricruz? And what kind of things does she prefer? It can seem a little silly, but it actually is one of those connections. It's something you can do virtually, but there are little connection points that let you also see inside. I think those things matter so much for people. And you'll hear this more from us this last year and a half is the art of leadership is being radically human. And I think the structural solutions, the policies, the process, the business planning, those things have fallen by the wayside. And now is the time for leadership, which is a human skill. And that connection is really important. Patrick, you're looking very thoughtful.
Sí, a ver, en nuestro grupo yo creo que nos quedamos discutiendo sobre una idea interesante y es que las resistencias, al menos en esta organización, en Alicor, muchas de las resistencias provienen de la cultura, ¿no? Y es que es una empresa que tiene una cultura de ganadores, ¿no? Entonces, cuando los tiempos no son tan sencillos, surgen frustraciones y esta incertidumbre sobre cuál es el norte, a dónde vamos, se manifiesta rápidamente, ¿no? Entonces, hay cosas que posiblemente ayudan es tener claridad en los mensajes desde los niveles más altos de decisión hacia abajo, ¿no? Los mensajes sobre cuál es el verdadero cambio, qué es lo que va a cambiar, qué es lo que ya no va a ser igual, qué es lo que va a ser más importante y qué es lo que ya no va a ser importante, ¿no? Pero al no haber claridad en los mensajes es donde empiezan a surgir temores y reacciones y aversión al cambio.
Yeah, and that's right. When you leave people to guess, they usually guess wrong almost every time. So it's not, it isn't just like it's not a good idea. It's just that they'll guess the things that suit their narrative. So I think you're right. And that plays to communication, even if there's not a big change in the vision, that line of sight, that communication channel is open, that it's frequent, that people aren't missing, it's just, it is critically important. Thank you. Sebastian. Oh, I'm sorry. Jose, please, and then I'll come to you, Sebastian.
Sí, una de las cosas que también hablamos en mi grupo, mi equipo, es la cantidad de proyectos, ¿no?, o de iniciativas que se estaban dando, se iban a dar. Entonces, esa cantidad, o sea, no estaba tan administrada, o sea, vienen demasiadas cosas. O sea, cuando queremos empezar a hacer una, ya están viniendo otras y otras y otras. Y entonces pareciera que tenemos un problema en priorizar, porque la organización no puede hacer todo. O sea, ya de por sí tenemos muchas responsabilidades, nos están reduciendo los recursos. Entonces, la idea, por lo menos, es tratar de que venga una cartera priorizada de proyectos, y sobre todo aquellos que tengan una mayor probabilidad de éxito en un menor corto posible, aplicando este método, pues, del Stage and Gate, ¿no? Y que para eso nos estaba ayudando también esta consultoría de BI.
Yep, you know, Jose, no team I've ever been to has ever said, I don't have enough project work. Everyone I've ever seen has been overwhelmed with the project. So again, back to this idea of prioritization and clarity become kind of our flag as we think about this. Sebastian.
No, hi Dennis, nice to see you.
Hey.
Al punto de Patrick, y lo conversamos en el grupo, decía algo como quick check-ins with the teams. Y justo yo comentaba que yo percibo de mis líderes, de Andrés y de Lucho, que tienen esos touch points seguidos, a pesar de repente de no tener todas las respuestas, que saben que les vamos a hacer las preguntas, y antes de repente, para hacer una comunicación o para algo, los líderes como que esperaban a tener todo bien armado para tener todas las respuestas. Y creo que es parte de lo que decían recién. Cuando no sabes, te imaginás, y en este ambiente de incertidumbre, seguramente te imagines mal. Entonces, creo que ahí se nota el cambio ese en los líderes, vicepresidentes, directores, etcétera, los que reportamos nosotros, de eso, de mantenernos bien informados o con la información que tienen, aunque sea parcial, para que justamente no imaginemos y no supongamos y transitemos mejor esta incertidumbre, ¿no? Eso creo que es una buena práctica, y decíamos ahí en el equipo, decía Moni, que nosotros deberíamos hacer lo mismo hacia abajo para nuestros equipos, porque la incertidumbre es general, ¿no? Nos está atravesando como compañía a todo nivel, ¿no?
Yeah. You know, time and time again, when you ask people what's most important at work, two themes come up constantly, every time, every different kind of survey you've ever seen. And and the two big things that come up for people are, tell me where we're going and bring out the best in me. Those two things become more and more important. So even if you don't know all the answers, the tell me where I'm going, tell me where we're going question or point is central. And I think Lucho is a great example of just keeping the connection going. And then this idea of bring out the best in me. We also shouldn't be afraid to say to people, what are you learning about this? You know, when I think there's how is this impacting you, but also what are you learning about this? Because some of this is also agility. Resilience is our response to adversity, our positive response to adversity. The more positive response we have when we're surprised by adversity, it's considered higher resilience. So some people are very high in resilience, some people have to practice it. Agility is, can we draw the lessons from our experience and apply them to brand new and novel situations, right? So a little more change ready. But of course, the examples that you're all giving are both, right? We have to be both resilient and have a positive response to adversity, but also agile, so we can apply our experience to new situations and get the most out of them. Gianfranco, and then Gil.
Hi, Denis. Hola, equipo. Lo que veníamos conversando en nuestro grupo, creo que hay dos cosas importantes que resaltar. La primera es que nosotros como organización, como cultura, como hemos conversado, como decía Patrick, somos súper ganadores, queremos hacer todo, pero tendemos a complicar las cosas, ¿no? Podríamos hacerlas más fáciles. Y eso es como una reflexión, dimos un montón de ejemplos, pero desde setear reuniones hasta cómo interactuamos, somos complejos. Entonces, creo que ahí hay un tema que dispara otro, que es importante, que tenemos que lidiar también como líderes todos los días, que es la coherencia, ¿no? El saber que estamos yendo hacia un lado implica probablemente renunciar a algunas cosas o implica tomar algunas decisiones complejas para las cuales no sabemos y no sabemos muy bien como líderes cómo explicarlas muchas veces porque tenemos que llegar con más cosas constantemente, ¿no? Esto presenta un reto importante porque cuando vamos a caminar un camino de cambio, sobre todo en crisis, tenemos que ser muy cuidadosos con los mensajes y muy coherentes, ¿no? No podemos caer en contradicciones porque los equipos lo resienten y perdemos credibilidad como líderes, ¿no? Y hemos puesto también ahí algunos ejemplos que seguramente cada uno tiene en su realidad, pero estas dos cosas, la coherencia y la simplicidad, creo que nos van a ayudar como líderes a transitar esto.
Yeah, so it's, as leaders, the more agile we are, the more we love optionality, the more we like choices. But our teams don't like so many choices often. So I think this back to this idea of clarity and communication, but the definition of strategy is what we say no to. And so we don't like to say no. So I think you're framing up that most difficult challenge is, where is it that we say we're not doing this, or we're careful about what are the many, is it too many options or is it one? Because neither of those serves us well, but there's a navigation of a path in between. Thank you for that, Gianfranco. Gil.
Nosotros hablábamos con el equipo de que somos muy buenos adoptando cambios. Somos ágiles, somos flexibles. Cada vez que enfrentamos un cambio, tenemos los recursos, el talento para adoptarlo rápidamente, ¿ok? Somos muy ágiles en ese sentido. Sin embargo, no tenemos un ecosistema que nos permita promover el cambio, cambios estructurales. Y poníamos un ejemplo, ¿no? Oye, después de 20 años cambiamos el SAP, ¿ok? Y es como que nuestro ecosistema no promueve esos cambios estructurales. O sea, tiene que llegar a un momento en que colapsa o que rebasa tus capacidades para que recién pienses en el cambio, cuando debería existir un ecosistema que está promoviendo ese cambio a la velocidad que requiere el entorno donde te desenvuelves, ¿no?
My microphone ecosystem is giving me a little bit of a problem here, so I'm switching headsets. Yeah, I think Gil, if you a couple of interesting things are true this year in the past year and a half, and that is that the structural solutions that we've often relied on are not so useful for us these days. And so sometimes you have these ecosystem structural changes that always lag the changes that we make in leadership. And I mean, SAP is a pretty long serving one, but the same thing will be true of approval policies. You know, they are always lagging where the business is going in terms of how fast we can move. Absolutely, always. And so in here, there is the persistence of leadership to change the policies, but also being wise enough to be able to circumvent where you need in some of these cases to move fast. So that is a very interesting, complex area. But I think I'll keep coming back to this idea that business planning, structural solutions to leadership are not serving us well this year as much as the more human side of leadership as we go through is, how do I help you get that done? And then we're always going to battle the lagging systems problem. You all know this, I think, but the secret about structure is it's always exactly right for where you just were. And it's never right for where you're about to go. And so structure always lags, right, change in this story. So I don't have a good answer for you other than to recognize that's absolutely true in terms of us trying to keep up with those structural answers. Let me move us to this last chapter and we'll get you into one more conversation about your playbook. So this idea of work avoidance, and it's not that people don't work hard, and it's not that people avoid doing the hard work at AliCorp. That's absolutely not true. But what can happen in very difficult change is that people often look up the chain of command. They often look to us as leaders and expect us to give them the answers that they are actually responsible for. And so the more chaos, the more complexity and uncertainty, the more people are very happy to look for more directive leadership. And our job as leaders is to make sure that we keep people accountable for the work that's theirs and not do their work for them. And so letting people take some initiative, having us pay attention to supporting them rather than giving the answer or giving them so much structure that it's easy to solve, is the hard work of leadership in difficult change, which is what's the first next step? What are you going to try? And then let's see how it goes. Our job is to not over structure the answer for them so that it's so clear that they are disenabled to making their own adaptive changes, right? And it's hard for us because we've often have a view. We often know the direction that we want to move in and some ideas about the solution. So the hard work is to give the work back. Give the work back to the people that are responsible for it, because they're very happy to give it to us in times of difficulty. Part two of this is work avoidance. So again, people aren't avoiding doing hard work, but work avoidance here is the resistance to the status quo. So the resistance that people will it'll start to emerge with people that will protect the way things have always been done. Whenever we try to progress something new, this work avoidance is what comes up. These are the big five. There's certainly more. One is denial. Work avoidance shows up as denial. That is, there really isn't a problem. I know we want to make these changes, but it's working fine. There isn't a problem. The second source of work avoidance is escapism. And that is, well, if there is a problem, that's not my problem. That's a finance problem. That's an HR problem. That's a problem out in the business, but it's not my problem. The third source of work avoidance is scapegoating, is they, right? Well, if only Alfredo would tell me, if only the senior leaders would tell me what to do, I do it, right? And that is this idea of if the government would settle down, or, if only we could make some progress in climate change. But scapegoating is whenever we avoid taking on the big change personally and try to push it off into someone else is responsible for this. Fourth is cynicism, and that is, it's so difficult, there actually is nothing we can do. It's impossible. We just have to wait. That one can be that's a hard one. And then the last one is the one that's a little, I'm not sure what the word is in Spanish, the one that's a little sneaky, the one that's hard to see, but it's fake remedies. And that is, we can see there's an issue and a challenge. We're trying to tackle that difficult challenge. And so we keep trying to define the problem to fit the skills we have today. We think it's one, we try to solve it like a technical problem. We think we know how to do it. And so we keep trying to solve it with today's skills, when in fact, it probably requires us to use some different skills that we may not have. Now, it's a fake remedy because oftentimes we don't want to seem unskilled, and we don't want to take the time to learn something new because we have a set of skills that has served us well in the past. So fake remedies come up where, yeah, this looks like an A, mostly like an A, so I'll use my A toolkit to fix it. And sometimes under fake remedies, you can see that through the misuse of committees. And that is, we keep convening large groups of people to talk about something whenever we may not want to address it as directly. So these are some of the examples of where work avoidance can show up. And if you think about the hard change that you face, you probably can think of where work avoidance will surface in my change. Either people will say, well, if only supply chain could fix that, if only finance would go faster, or is it that I'm not sure why we're doing this because everything's working fine. But you will probably have in your mind a hypothesis about where that work avoidance will surface. So chapter 3 is the idea of we have to make sure in the most difficult change we give the work back to the people who are responsible for it and not do it for them. And second, we have to be able to identify where work avoidance is going to surface, where people are going to feel like they can't do anything, or they will use that as the reason that they don't move forward on those difficult things and keep doing things the way that they always have. And if we can name it, the work avoidance, then we can address it more directly and keep people focused. Okay, so here's my closing picture, my beautiful piece of art to show you. So here is the path. Let me see if I have my, well, anyway, the light gray line on the left where you see it says technical challenge. What happens in the bottom of the graph here is time. What happens with a technical challenge is it's very disorienting at first. It seems impossible. If you thought about when Phoenix started, how do we start? It's a massive change. It starts very disorienting, but very quickly, we learn enough to be able to start segmenting it, planning it, trying it, and doing the work and getting the project plans in place. You might have one bump along the way where, oh, we didn't expect that, like in the rollout, and then we continue to reduce our own sense of discomfort and disorientation because we can plan it out. So technical challenges solved by expertise, they feel impossible at the very beginning, but very quickly we understand them and we solve them. But the black line is an adaptive challenge, and that is they don't seem terribly disorienting and difficult until we start to learn more. And then we realize it really is hard. And then about the time we think we got it, we start getting clarity, we realize we don't. And then you'll get the second bump, and then we'll learn some more about it, and then our disorientation and our disequilibrium will reduce. We start getting clearer, and then we'll learn something new about it. And so what you'll find is you'll have about 3 of these bumps where you get a surprise in an adaptive challenge, and then work avoidance will start popping out. Oh, nothing can be done. If they would just tell me, I would do it. It's impossible. We better just wait and see what happens. And so the point I want to make is for adaptive challenges, it's going to take a few bumps and bruises along the way, and they evolve over time. We learn more and we try more, we make better decisions, but they last longer than technical challenges, and they are harder for people to stick to it because there's a little bit, they're more disorienting. And so that little gray zone you see at the top, I love this is the term that Linsky and Heifetz at Harvard use. It's the zone of productive disequilibrium. It is the zone of productive disequilibrium. That is, people aren't perfect. They're a little bit they're a little bit disoriented, but they keep moving forward. So how do we keep people moving even though they're uncomfortable? We keep them moving forward and we keep trying, because then we get clearer and we understand the process, the issues more, and we solve them. So it isn't comfortable, but that is the path of an adaptive challenge versus a technical one. I think, as we all know, some challenges we faced have felt like that there were several bumps, and it felt like we were done, we weren't done, as opposed to those technical challenges. So this is my story for those hardest change areas. The ones that are hardest are adaptive. They require us to learn. They are the ones that people don't want to approach because they have success factors and success formulas. And we have to make guesses about what their felt sense of loss is. We have to find ways to battle that work avoidance when people want to check out and go back to the old ways. And we have to hold firm and take the heat to keep people in it and help them move through it. I know it's difficult. I know this is really hard, but we've got to stick with it, and we're going to move through it. So Don't fix things for people. Don't be afraid to ask the tough questions. And the adaptive change, doing adaptive change, is the heart of us being both challenge and support. We want to challenge people in new ways, but we also want to support them. Challenge and support is kind of the key words for these adaptive change and helping people move through this difficult stuff. And of course, lastly, we encourage experimentation. What can we try? What's the first next step? What can we try and see what happens? Those are the ways that we disarm the immune system as we work through this difficult change. All these slides, of course, are available to you. What I'd like to do is I will happily take some questions at the end, but I also want to give you some time together in a group. So Flora, if you'll set up for 15 minutes. In our last segment, after this one, in our last macro module, we're going to be talking about a playbook. That is, what are some of the ways that I will lead change differently going forward? In the last segment, we're going to have Aldo and Marcelo are going to be talking with us. One of the features or themes is going to be new business models. What about change when we implement new business models, and how does that go well? What goes well, what doesn't? But for you, I want you to take 15 minutes now, get into some small groups and start the first conversation about what's our group's playbook? What are those few things that are very important for us to lead difficult change going forward at AliCorp? And then I'll give you some more time in the session with Aldo before we meet with them to work on your playbook a little more. But what we want to do then is sort of tell some of the stories about what did we learn so far in this journey about change, and what are some of those things that we'll take forward as leaders to help people through these really difficult change. So let's take 15 minutes now and just start that conversation. What are some of the important things that you've learned over these 3 macro modules that are going to serve you well in leading difficult change in the future?
Don't leave, Lucho. Come back, Lucho.
Ya estamos.
So I know I rushed us. I just wanted to make sure we actually held some time for you to just get your head around some of the ideas that are going to be helpful for your leadership. And I wanted to hold a little time here at the end. So we have 20 or 30 minutes. But I'm wondering what's on your mind. I'm happy to talk about chapter 3 of the adaptive change story, you know, why these technical challenges are fast to resolve, or these adaptive challenges are so painful because they go through so many waves. But what are some of your thoughts? What are some of your reactions or questions? What did you guys talk about? Alberto, I haven't called on you the whole session. I just want to point that out. But what did you guys talk about?
Well, actually, we're talking about alignment between the actions and the thoughts. That's key. The relevance about picking your stakeholders, and the fact that you must have a psychological safety in order to declare what are you afraid of, what's your doubts on the challenge, right? So our conversation were around that.
Very nice. Just creating the environment where at least you could have a chance to hear.
Yeah,
what's on people's minds.
Yeah, and of course communication. With Sebas, we were talking about something that he already mentioned, that Lucho is up now talking about things that's not completely sure, but communicating to us at the moment he knows that. So you can like prepare, and sometimes you ask questions, but there is no answer, but you know that he's trying to do the best to keep all in the same line.
And I think that that's helpful for a lot of reasons. And one is people will always guess there's more they don't know. And so when you keep up that cadence, I think it does matter for people, because they always think, well, what aren't we being told? Why, you know, is there some big plan? And at least if he can say there's no big plan, we're working on the plan, that goes a long way for transparency. Thank you. Thanks, Albert. Who else? What else did you talk about? What's on your mind around the skill of leading change? Mafe, what were you thinking about, or what did you guys talk about?
You hear me?
Uh-huh.
Yes. I was in the same team with Beto. We talked about the importance of the transparency in the communication. And it's very important to be a constantly communication, not all the time. And we need to develop the capacity to make mistakes, and it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Move fast in other way.
Yeah, we haven't talked about that yet, but yeah, it's another thing at Alicorp. We don't like to make mistakes. We don't like to say we made mistakes. We don't like to make mistakes. And you can't get someplace new without it. It's I think it's a very interesting dynamic. Monica, how about you?
We were in the same team.
Yes.
Am I good? Am I good? Am I good or am I good? I mean, I apparently can hit everyone in the same team.
I can give you a hint, Dennis. All number ones were together.
Too funny, too funny. See, I just see the pick down. Now I can see the numbers, yeah.
Creo que algo adicional de lo que hablamos en el equipo es de la importancia de la coherencia, ¿no? De no solamente decirlo, sino que las acciones reflejen lo que decimos. Un poco lo que tú decías ahorita. Decimos que nos queremos equivocar, pero no nos gusta equivocarnos. Entonces, creo que este cambio de cultura también va por la coherencia. Si digo que priorizo, pues no puedo dar un mensaje contrario, ¿no? No puedo, no sé, Beto por ejemplo, no puedo contratar 300 personas nuevas para un área, ¿no? Entonces, creo que la coherencia, tanto de los líderes como de nosotros mismos hacia abajo, es súper importante.
I like it. Consistency or coherence, absolutely, absolutely. Or yeah, absolutely correct. Hugo, please.
Sí, lo que hablamos en mi equipo era también que lo que necesitamos es un poco de empatía, saber reconocer que el cambio va a traer esta resistencia, y empatía en el hecho de transmitirles y decirle al equipo, no podemos tapar el sol con un dedo, el cambio va a doler, van a haber cosas que no nos van a gustar, reconocerlas, enumerarlas y conversarlas con todo el equipo, pero a pesar de esto, tener una visión clara de que, oye, esto es para mejor, miren el análisis costo-beneficio, y esta es la decisión que nos va a llevar a un mejor lugar, ¿no? Entonces, pero no hacer como que no, todo va a estar lindo, porque esa falsedad se transmite y luego eso es lo que genera que la gente hable por detrás, ¿no? Y empiecen a haber estos rumores o chismes. Mejor es atacarlo de frente y decir, oye, ok, ¿cuáles son tus dolores? Y los tuyos, y así pasar cada uno del equipo y decir, ok, hay dolor, pero ¿estamos de acuerdo todos que esta es la mejor opción? Sí, ok, entonces con todo esto, veamos cómo lo resolvemos y vamos adelante, ¿no?
Hugo, thanks. As a rule, when we can frame something from the positive, we get both, people get information and we can generate motivation. And so those two things are helpful. However, you bring up a great point that says, there's plenty being written today about toxic positivity. It's like everything isn't positive and some things are just hard. And we have to be real about what those are, right? And that I think that there's empathy that is not sympathy. There is, I understand this is difficult and I hear you, right? And it's hard work. And how do we keep moving through? But again, you're also pointing towards something like clarity as well, or transparency, maybe. We'll get back to consistency. Very nice. Thanks, Hugo. Good to see you. Maricruz.
I think that something important here is like, ay, ¿por qué estoy hablando en inglés? Ok, creo que otro punto importante aquí es que a las personas y a la empresa tenemos que hacerlas sentir parte del cambio, no espectadores del cambio. Creo que cuando el equipo a veces es espectador del cambio, la incertidumbre, la ambigüedad, viene de manera mucho más fuerte. En cambio, cuando es parte del cambio, se compran el problema. Y a veces pasa que como jefes o líderes queremos tener y dar la respuesta para dar dirección. Pero a veces no es necesario solamente dar dirección, a veces es necesario ir y sentarse y decir que necesitamos cambiar y que no sabemos qué hacer y que nos ayuden. Creo que eso es hacerlos parte de, no espectadores de, y creo que eso es algo súper importante.
I like it. And yeah, sometimes we talk about you can't just ride on the bus. You got to be part of the story. Just can't sit on the sidelines. But and sometimes you can say that to people, which is we can't just we're not just going to wait. We can't just wait until this blows over. This isn't just going to solve itself. But and how can we be part of it? So certainly invite them. And sometimes we just have to say, we're all in this, so how do we work it? Let me get in on some of those. Thank you for that. Anyone else? Anything else come up in your group? Franz, how about your team or you? Everybody's thinking, I didn't know there was going to be cold calling during the chain session. Franz may not be there. Any other comments that people want to raise when we come in? These ideas of really hard change, the ideas of people aren't motivated by bad thoughts or intentionally being negative. When they try to keep the status quo or they keep doing things the way they've always done them, it's just the nature of systems that they try to maintain equilibrium. And sometimes people don't know, and sometimes people are afraid to try new things, to look unskilled or to fail at something. And so it isn't that people are avoiding us or avoiding the change. Sometimes it is that they can't move forward easily, but it's usually not intentional. But it is something we have to help them through. Franz, did you hear me calling your name?
No.
No? See?
No.
I was wondering. I was just wondering, what did your and then Alvaro, I'll come to you. What did your team talk about? What was some of the big ideas in your group?
Bueno, nosotros básicamente hablamos justamente de que hoy día el curso coincide un poco con esta coyuntura complicada que se está teniendo en varias geografías por distintos factores, ¿no? Perú por el lado de un cambio de gobierno, un cambio de situación política que abarca muchas cosas. Bolivia, un país que depende mucho de la venta de óleos y hoy día tienes una situación competitiva de óleos bastante complicada. Argentina con el dólar blue y sus características. Entonces, dentro de esto lo que conversábamos es que a los equipos lo primero es que hay que acompañarlos en esta cambio de pensamiento que van a tener y darles más seguridad y tranquilidad, ¿no? La forma de trabajar los procesos va a cambiar. Hoy día estamos, de repente cosas que te tomaban más tiempo y tenías más margen de error y podías probar y todo, hoy día la necesidad de resultado es un poco más rápida, ¿no? Entonces la experimentación va a ser también mucho más fuerte y es un poco meter esta dinámica en la conversación con los equipos y acompañarlos en esa dinámica también, ¿no? Básicamente, creo que de lo que hemos conversado eso era lo más importante.
Thanks, Franz. And we're we're coming back around to some of the ideas around creating psychological safety, creating some room for experimentation, tolerating some sense of failure that people can try. We're not overstructuring for them, become the kind of the fabric or the currency for us. And I think we all know it is political tension today, and tomorrow it's going to be climate change, or it'll be something else. But there will be this large-scale disruption in the world that will keep us adaptive, that are going to keep us making these kind of changes. Alvaro, you've been patient.
Hola, hola Denis, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estás? Hola a todos. Sí, bueno, en realidad no voy a decir nada nuevo porque ya lo han dicho, pero lo que hemos rescatado y lo que yo un poco me puse a pensar ahora es que a veces es un poco contradictorio hablar de experimentación, hablar de tolerar el error para luego aprender y para seguir siendo protagonistas del cambio. Es a veces un poco contradictorio con quizás la presión financiera que a veces tenemos en el cortísimo plazo, y sobre todo en un año como este, donde el corto plazo ya ni siquiera es un mes, ¿no? A veces es hasta una quincena, donde se toman decisiones muy orientadas a la parte financiera, y que cuesta armar ese balance con lo que estamos hablando acá, ¿no? Que es, oye, sé protagonista del cambio, experimenta, si te equivocas, lo vuelves a hacer. No hay margen de error para eso ahorita. Y creo que tenemos que hacer un arte nosotros, el arte de malabarar con todo eso, ¿no? Con ambos puntos, con ambos lados de la moneda, y creo que tenemos que enfocar en cómo hacemos eso, ¿no? O sea, cómo bajamos a los equipos la necesidad que tiene la empresa por resultados financieros de corto plazo, pero sin dejar de hacer y sin dejar de tener este safety o esta parte de poder equivocarnos. Que al final eso va a alimentar al futuro y alimentar un mañana mejor, como siempre lo conversamos, ¿no? Eso es un poco la reflexión o lo difícil de esto, ¿no?
No, thank you. Thank you for that. And there's no doubt that the increase of paradox of competing priorities, that is, run the business and change the business. Those two things are at odds. They don't work well together, and yet we'll have to do those things. And you remind me, years ago, I was starting a couple of learning academies in South Africa, and somebody, after I was there 3 days, somebody had to sit me down and give me a translation lesson. And so in South African, when you say, I want something now, that means by the end of the week. And if you say, I want something right now, then that usually means in the next couple of days. But if you need it today, you better say you need it now. And so I think that's your new financial position is now. I need to have to, let's make sure that time frame has shrunk. But I'm not making light of the challenge of us managing that paradox, that competing tension of run this business while we change this business. It got hard this year, and this will wane. I'm not sure what the Spanish word is for that, but this will, when we say wax and wane, right now, it's going to be a hard year. There's going to be political issues, and that will shift and change. These things come in waves. Any final comments? I just want everybody to observe I was patient there for 3 or 4 seconds. An excellent, okay. Our next chapter, when we do this 4th session on change, we will have a couple of things to happen. One is we have the Tasai case study. And so please make sure you read the case study if you haven't. So we have the Trouble at Tasai case study. One of the ways that we learn a great deal is to get a little distance from our own issues and see them through a different lens. And so Tasai is a really interesting case about changing a culture when you weren't able to just get a budget to do it. You weren't able to, and that many people had tried many things, but it was hard going on a business that had increasing pressures. And so Tasai is a really Really interesting case study. Oh, I'm sorry, Maricruz, was that your hand from before, or did you have a comment that you wanted to make here?
No, it's my hand from before.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So please do the Trouble at Tasai case. It's really interesting. We're going to do that in some group work, and I'll start off with what do we think the problem is behind Tasai, and you're going to find issues with the workforce, issues with the workload, and it's fascinating how fast they have to turn those trains around and cleaning these trains in Japan. So please read the case. And then second, we're going to get some more time to think about our own playbook. And then we're going to talk with Aldo, and I and Marcelo are going to just do a little bit of commentary and conversation with you as you've had some more time to think about what is it I want to add to my playbook to lead change more effectively as I look forward here. Britt, I'm going to turn it over to you, my friend.
Gracias, Denis. Gracias a todos. Muchísimas gracias por las reflexiones. A veces tomamos un poquito de lo que ustedes van compartiendo para seguir reflexionando internamente, no un poquito, en verdad, bastante, entre Denis, con el equipo, en recursos humanos. De verdad que muchas gracias por la franqueza, por la, no sé, valentía, vulnerabilidad de compartir todo lo que han compartido en esta sesión. De verdad que es muy, muy interesante ver ese, más que nivel de participación, ese nivel de entrega, ¿no? Y de cómo construyen confianza en este espacio de aprendizaje. No redundo lo que dijo Denis, por favor lean el caso Tesei para la última sesión. Algo adicional quizás es que luego van a tener un espacio con 2 directores para compartir este playbook, estos aprendizajes de estos días de taller de Liderando el Cambio. Van a recibir también inputs sobre eso que presenten. Y ya está, les devolvemos 16 minutos en su agenda.
Buenísimo.
Gracias.
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 Bye bye.